Chris Mark. Enjoy, everyone.
Thanks for the introduction, Chris. As Chris, I'm the head coach of GB National Tennis Academy. For the ones who doesn't know, like one of the two centers in Great Britain, and we're trying to have something like unique here and big, like could be good for our players, for the British tennis, but also for Scottish. Want to make an impact in the Scottish tennis as well. So that's why you're trying at this moment of lockdown and that a lot of us are not working like normal. Bring good information for us, good knowledge. For the ones follow our Instagram, we brought a lot of like nice people like Ferrero, Jamie Murray, Francis Roigi, Johnny O'Mara, Maya, um, Cici Bellis. Who else? What was the last one? Bruno Suarez yesterday. So I think it's a good way to like kind of share information and learn from this moment. I worked 8 years in a USDA from 2009 to 2007. I can tell everybody here. Well, first of all, thanks for coming, everyone. Like we have 82 people on Friday 6 p.m. It's very impressive. So thanks a lot for coming. So I worked for USDA from 2009 to 2017. I was a lead coach there, and I was head coach of the center in California. And for me, it was a great experience because it was the place that I met the most knowledge people that I still have contacts, like Jose Guerras, Patrick McEnroe. But I had some knowledge about coaching, and I used to work with Ferrero a little bit. So I had some like coaching, the coach work coaching. I met some more people before USTA, and Mark Kovacs was the first biomechanical guy. And I don't want to introduce him as a biomechanical guy because I think that he's way more than this. But he was the first guy that I had a chance to talk about biomechanical, to talk about movement, to talk about everything, and this was like an open eyes for me. So Mark again, he was 8 years in USDA as well. He was the director of sports science, strength and conditioning, and also coaching education USDA. So he touched a lot of place there. I would say was kind of guru. Any problem that you had was Jose or Mark. So a little bit more Jose on court, tactical stuff. But Mark, movement, biomechanical, injury, recovering, everything I was very fortunate, and everybody who worked with him. I think that we're very fortunate to have him. After this, he was a former director of Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Is a institute that Gatorade have in Atlanta, Georgia. That works up with a lot of things like CSAM, like make the new drinking thing to start new athletes, study everything. He's a doctor. He is CEO of his institute right now, Kovacs Institute. For the ones who wants to take a look, it's a very interesting page. And now he's the head of sports science of Cleveland Cavaliers, the NBA team, which is I think everybody's like very excited about basketball. Watch The Last Dance, so we can see how important, how big is the basketball. And for me, we always talk about this, Mark, in USTA, that the day that those athletes start to play tennis, then will be a game change. And in 2012, Mark became the youngest ever International Tennis Hall of Fame Educational Merit Award. And right now, for us, it's a pleasure that he's the consultant of GB National Tennis Academy here. So biomechanical, so work with me, Colin, Bruno, Karin Lam, Tony, and also with Shan and Catherine about fitness and recovery. So welcome, Mark.
Leo, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Excited to be here with everyone. And as you said, we've known each other over a decade, and I've known Colin for a long time as well, and Chris and a bunch of other folks involved. So thanks for all you're doing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this, talking a little tennis, talking a little sports science. It'll be fun.
Good. Also very important, I don't know if you guys know, Mark was a player, was a very good, was national doubles player in the college and was a professional tennis player. Very good volleys, good slice backhand. When the ball comes high, and a little bit, the quality drops a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Was never the best clay court player.
but if you come to Scotland, it'll be good for you,
Yeah.
huh? Indoors, it'll be great. So Mark, I will start. For me, like you are great in a lot of things, and I think that we have an hour here to 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 know this. That look, since the not just ground strokes to everyone, but for me, in my opinion, the thing that you changed my way to coach was the serve. I think that there is a lot. I think that if you take a look, if you talk about forehand or backhands, the parameters are a little bit bigger, and some details can make a difference or not. But again, there is more room to navigate, and I think that serve sometimes it's like one very small detail make a huge difference. And this I can tell right now that I learn a lot with you, like with the toss that I ask you. So my main thing is that when you start to, and I think that your specialty as well on tennis aspect. When do you start to give that much attention to serve and why?
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a really good point. The serve is the only stroke in the game that you 100% control. So you have more ability to make sure that that is close to perfect. The ground strokes, as you said, you're so much more reacting, and grips dictate swing paths, which dictate contact points. So you change a little thing on a grip, it changes the entire stroke. Whereas in the serve, you want to make sure that your fundamentals are sound. And I think it's important to start as early as possible. As soon as the athlete has the ability to comprehend instruction, and that could be visual instruction, it could be kinesthetic instruction, positioning them in a certain way, or it could be verbal instruction. It depends. Some athletes respond better to different types of instruction, but in general, as long as they can coordinate their movements, and the problem with the serve is the moment they toss the ball, once it gets above their head, young kids struggle sometimes in maintaining balance and coordination once their head looks up. And that's where you see a lot of challenges with the serve. But the basics around grip and take back and lower body loading and all that, there's no reason a young player shouldn't learn the right fundamentals at an early age.
Yeah, for me this is very important because I think that there is a lot of common things in a young age, people who open the face of the hand back, not enough hip turn, and I think that those things as soon as we can fix this as coaches, it will be way better for the development of the player. Then, again, people use serve platform. Some people will bring the foot together. But anyways, there is a lot of things that in a very early age, if you know that this is a common thing, like drop the head, open the face of the racket, we need to we kind of with you, we try to create an agenda here about serve at GB National Tennis Academy, and everybody got better, like way better. So this is was something very interesting for us. If you can tell us, Mark, like the three main things that you take a look when you look at someone serving, which one will be?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it starts with the toss. If you don't get the toss in the right position, not only the ball, but your arm at release is really important because that allows your hips to turn. That's stage 2 of the motion. And then that leads directly into loading or trophy position. You got to get the ball release and the loading position right. If that's not right, doesn't matter what else you do, you really can't make up for an error there. So you got to get those two positions right. And then the third big one is staying side on as you come through towards contact. If you can do those three things, you're going to have a reasonable serve. The rest, everything else that comes around that, a lot of it is style. We haven't talked about grips. We haven't talked about some of the other things that definitely play a role in it. But if you are releasing the ball in the right spot from the ball toss, it means you're going to have a relatively consistent toss in the right spot. If you load the leg appropriately in stage 3 loading, then you're going to be able to come out in hopefully the right direction. And then if you stay side on as long as you can through contact, you're going to be able to make contact with the ball at a reasonable position. So again, they're big picture things that I would say if you can do those three things, you're going to have a reasonable serve. Then as you get up in the levels, then you've got to do a lot more of the fine tuning and things like that. But big picture, that's the three things I would say are the things that we change with most people. When most people come and say, hey, I got to get better at my serve or I'm having a problem, usually you focus on those three things and everything else falls into line after that.
Good, very good. I have a question about the toss and the release of the ball because I think it is a. Let me see if I can put myself here in the position. I think it's a very common coaching or tip that since I think that we are very young, we listen that we players should release the ball like in the shoulder high or by their mouth, and then with you, I learned with you that you told me that that not the high needs to be between eyes and the end of the well, my head is a little bit big, but between the eyes and the end of the head.
Yeah, and that was just.
And for me, this was a complete game change because when you send me the videos with players that we work together, because it's pretty tough for us as a coach to see this with just with the eyes. True. The difference between the mouth and the eyes is like 4 fingers. But it's a completely game change. So can you explain to all the coaches here like this that for me was completely a game change?
Yeah, no. I mean, your point's a great one. You can't tell that difference by looking at it in real speed. I can't, you can't. It's too small a distance. So we have to use video to see that. But we did a study early in my time at the USTA because one of the big things when I did my initial review of what things we needed as a group and an association to get better at, like every tennis player, we said serve needs to be a priority. So we spent the first year I was there, we just did research on the serve. Looked at all the great servers going back 20 to 30 years and said what are the commonalities, what are the consistent areas, the fundamentals that they all do. Forget about the style, focus on the fundamentals. And that was one of the fundamentals, was every good server releases the ball in a very narrow area. It's very consistent. And bad servers or servers that are inconsistent, they release the ball in a lot of different zones. So that was one that, like you said, is between the eye and the top of the head. If you release it there, you're going to have a more consistent release point. The negative of releasing it lower is usually the ball gets out in front of you. If you release it too high, it gets behind you or for a right-hander to the left a little bit too much. So taking that out as an area of concern is huge because we all know a lot of players, especially younger players, struggle with getting a consistent ball toss.
Yeah, and I can give to you guys, all the coaches here, my testimony that this for me was a game change because it's something that you can be as good coach as we can be, but it's impossible. Someone tell you, oh no, John, you're not making the toss between your right. No, it's very tough. So you need someone with the computer to tell you. But I think the information to the players we can start to deliver in a young age. Say, look, that's not the shoulder. Like try to delay a little bit the toss, and then if you have someone that can make the video, that's for me is so the difference is so big. And my last one, Mark, then I work for the question is another thing that I learned a lot with you is the importance of the back hip because again I a lot of times when I start to coach, my memory was I have the memory about the people who coach me. So on my time, a lot of times I listen to information. You have to turn your hip, but always people used to say you turn the front hip and not the back hip. So lately on my days as a coach and with you way more, I start to understand that who leads the turn is the back hip. Can you explain a little bit more the importance of the back hip turn, please?
Yeah, no. I think a lot of the challenge historically, and I learned a different way than I teach now because of the study and the research that a lot of people before me did that I learned from. So it's just an evolution because before video, there was a lot of misinformation about what the positioning of the serve should look like. One of the probably biggest miscues that many coaches still take sometimes is saying push your front hip out over the baseline. Stick that front hip out. That was
Yeah.
a coaching cue for a long, long time, and it's getting better now. People aren't using that as much, but it's a real problem because you shift your weight into your front leg too early and you don't load your back hip. Your real objective is to load into the back hip and drop back and down. And the reason being is you want to go up and out. So it's basic physics. If you go back to basic physics principles, for every action we have an equal and opposite reaction. So for us to go up and out, we have to store back and down. And that's really what you're talking about. That back hip has to load back and down. And then you can come out of that explosively in the right direction. So you're exactly right. We know, and also there's been some great research done in labs. A couple great biomechanics researchers have looked at correlation between serve speed and what part of the body is the biggest, highest correlation with serve speed. And the number one correlation with serve speed is how quickly your back hip goes from storing energy to releasing energy. So we know how vital it is to serving well.
Great. I'll make one more question related to this, and then Chris will open for some of the questions that we have. So you study servers a lot, and we talk about this a lot. And I talk to Jose a lot about the old people. In your opinion, who is the most perfect server, biomechanical wise, that you ever watched?
It's a great question. There's a lot, and the fundamentals are very similar. I mean, a lot of people will put Sampras at top of the list, and he's unbelievably rhythmical, but he has range that no one else on the planet has. He can get his body was able to do things that no one probably on this call can do. So we have to be careful trying to mimic him because he had range, he had depth, he had strength that folks don't have. So his is a hard one to copy. It's great. The motion's phenomenal, but it's hard to copy. You've got people more like, say, a John Isner, even though he's very tall, his motion is very compact, very simple. It's a good general motion for people to look at. Nick Kyrgios is a different motion, but he does everything right. He's got a lower ball toss. His back leg load is phenomenal. He comes out of his hips explosively well. So those are some examples on the guy side that have all different serves. Federer, a lot of people use as an example. But again, Federer's got some areas he could still improve on. He doesn't stay side on as long as he could. He has some options there. But again, he's got a great motion. And if you watch him when he was 19, 20, 21, the year he beat Sampras at Wimbledon, he had a very different motion than he does now. So it's interesting to see an evolution even in those servers. Fundamentals are basically the same, but there's a lot of stylistic differences. On the women's side, everyone points to Serena, and Serena's, when she serves well, has a phenomenal motion, but her motion goes off. She shifts her weight into her front leg sometimes too early, and that's when she loses her positioning and her rhythm. Madison Keys is another one that when she does it well is phenomenal, but hers goes off as well because they just shift into the front leg sometimes too early. Sam Stosur is outstanding, and again, the problem with Sam is that she has range that no one else on the planet has as well. She has some ability that you can't always copy. So you have to be careful when you're looking at the pros and then you're trying to either work with a younger player. Be careful not to say, hey, I want you to serve like Sampras or I want you to serve like Sam Stosur. You can't physically have certain players do that if they don't have the same makeup.
Good. It's interesting because Andy, when they're making the perfect player nowadays, he said about Kyrgios serve.
Yeah.
And a lot of people said that is a great one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start the questions. The first one I will give to one player, Hannah Rylat, who have an interesting question. So let's do it, Hannah.
What's it like to work with some of the best professional tennis players?
Hey, sorry, could you repeat that again, Hannah? I just missed the first part of that.
What's it like to work with some of the best professional tennis players?
So what it's like to work with some of the best pros, very similar to working with juniors. They have their same issues that all of you have as players. Some of them are really disciplined. Some of them are a little lazy. Some of them don't work as hard as they should. Some of them do take care of the details. So they have the same challenges, and they were juniors at one point, and so they were going through the same pathway. So a lot of the time they don't have anything different than you have. The reason they got there many times is a combination of they have some physical gifts that is unique, but they also all of them work very hard in certain areas. But there's a reason that there are top 10 players and there are a reason that there are top 100 players. The top 10 players pretty much do everything right. The top 100 players do a lot of things right, but are usually missing one or two or three things that they could be doing better. And that's really from that perspective is very similar in the junior game as well. So I wouldn't look at the pros and say they're so different to junior players. They're just older and they've gone through the process longer. But they're still struggling with the same challenges juniors. Many of them get nervous in big matches. Many of them don't always do the little things as well as they could. So they were juniors. I worked with a lot of them as juniors as well. So you saw them develop and you saw them grow up. So it's no real different than where you may be currently. You've just got to stay focused on your goals and realize that some of the stuff you don't like to do right now is probably the most important things you should be doing. The stuff you really like to do, you're always going to do that and you're probably going to do really well at that. Start focusing a bit more on the things that you don't like to do as much and that your coaches are telling you, hey, for you to move to the next level, you're going to have to get better at these areas. And that's what the great ones always do. They always look to say, I know I'm good at certain things. I'm going to continue to work on my strengths, but I also don't want to have any weaknesses. And you look at the Federers, Nadals of the world, when they came on tour, they looked very different. I always liked watching the evolution of a player and saying, what did they look like at 17, 18, and what do they look like at 28 or 30? And you'll see the good ones have improved pretty much every part of their game. The ones that are still hovering sort of and haven't made that much of a ranking jump, you watch them and you're like, yeah, they really don't look that much different. They haven't added to their skill set. And that's the same in every industry. That's in business as well. That's in all industries is you have to keep getting better. And the best ones do that better than everyone else.
Very good, Mark. One thing to add, Hannah and all the players. Rebecca, I think, who is here, she's our nutritionist. When Jose came to Scotland, she made a question to Jose, like, when the players start to understand those things, like how important is the nutrition or how important is the this and that. And his answer for me was very interesting. He said, as better as the player, soon they realize those things. So it's very important for every single one here who is a junior player or who have a junior players that the good ones, the ones who be good ones, they kind of realize things before. So I think that what Mark says that doesn't matter for junior or pro, when you start to realize the important things for you, have good work ethic and everything, things become easier. Chris.
Cool. We have a question from our Chilean friend, Philippe. Philippe, are you comfortable to ask that question? It's not a personal one, don't worry. If he's not, I can ask on his behalf. He wanted some clarification, Mark, on whether you would work on the ball toss in isolation or as part of the whole action, and also maybe clarify the wrist position, if there was an optimal wrist position when releasing the ball.
Yeah, no, great question. So the ball toss, it's amazing because that's been a drill that I think everyone has done, where you stand there and you just kind of throw the ball up and trying to get comfortable with a ball toss and you let the ball bounce in front of you. And that's a drill that I would say just about everyone's probably done at some point in their life. And there was a study done actually in Australia. Some researchers looked at this probably about 12 years ago now, and they compared ball height and ball position when you do a ball toss drill where you just throw the ball up and you let it drop and you don't actually hit it and swing. And they compared that location and position of the ball to when you actually serve. And they found that there was about 1 foot to 1.5 foot difference in height, and there was definitely some big differences in location as well. So it didn't transfer very well is the basic answer to that question. So as a beginner, it's not a bad drill. You have to practice and you have to just get comfortable with releasing the ball. But as you move up the levels, don't think that that's going to transfer that well to your serve. It's better to just actually hit serves practicing your ball toss in the right location rather than isolating out the ball toss. But as a beginner, it's a good drill just to get them started and to get them comfortable with the mechanics. But once they've got that down, wouldn't necessarily do that for a long-term period of time.
Maybe it can be a good drill for the lockdown, no, Mark? A lot of people is not serving, so you can make the toss.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from a lockdown standpoint, if you can serve into something, that would be great. I mean, that's what we've recommended a lot, is get a net, get a sheet, put it up in, if you've got access to inside, if the ceiling's high enough, which for most people it's not, if you can get outside anywhere, try to hang a sheet up and serve balls into a sheet. That gives you a way to practice your serve in a somewhat realistic way. And then the wrist position. Yeah.
No, the wrist position.
Yeah, the wrist position is style. So I don't usually overly coach that. If it's really bad and the ball's going all over the place, then make an adjustment, of course, stabilize the wrist and just have the ball come out of the hand. But you've seen so many great pros that have a very different release with their wrists. Some have what I call the beer can release, like that. So it's like you're drinking a beer. They release it on the side with the thumb up. Some will have it, palm up. Some will have 3 or 4 fingers. Some will have, their hand will even release down, which is not recommended. But Serena Williams does it pretty well. The ball starts in her palm and it rolls down her fingertips before she releases it. So I wouldn't normally recommend that because it just creates potential error. But, you've got some great servers. So in my way of looking at the serve, I'm like, if it's style, I'm not going to overcoach it or undercoach it. If it's fundamentals, I'm going to focus only on the fundamentals. And then the stylistic part is what makes these players unique.
Good. One thing, Mark, before the next question. You talked a bit about the outcome, and one thing that I learned with you that for the young players sometimes it's very important to serve without they see the outcome. So put them to serve to the fence. Yep. And I have one of the players that improved the serve the most in our academy. We did this a lot and was huge because a lot of times the young players, they just see the outcome. So we see that it's getting better, but the ball doesn't get in. They don't pay attention, and I think that is very important. Another thing that I learned with you, can you talk a little bit more about this, like to serve to another place and not to the box?
Yeah, no, I actually learned that concept a lot watching some great golf coaches, because in golf, they have the same challenge we have. We have a power or spin goal, and then we have an accuracy or placement goal. And doing both at once is really not possible when you're learning a skill. You have to pick and choose. Do I want accuracy as my priority, or do I want speed or power as my priority? So both of those need to be focused in slightly different ways. So like you said, if your goal is to work on technique and speed, take them out of the focus on accuracy. Once they get speed and technique down, then we focus in on accuracy. It's a little hard if they're competing. That's the challenge that young players have, because typically we know we want to teach speed and power first before worrying about accuracy. But unfortunately in tennis, typically we teach accuracy first. We say, hey, we want to get the ball in the box so you can start a point. So if you want to make a great player, it's actually based on the science of how people learn and what we're trying to develop. It's better to learn speed and power first and then focus in on accuracy. But that also means when you play matches at a young age, you may miss a lot of serves, which people don't like to do. So there's a real challenge there, and it's trying to find the balance between those two.
Yeah. Look, for me, this is a great advice. I have a question here, Mark, from Catherine. It's our physio. You know her a little bit by phone, and so
hey.
She's great. Question, Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, just a quick one. It's just really when you're analysing the serve, how do you look for anything in particular to know if it's a technical issue or a physical issue, or probably the latter, a bit of both?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and good to see you again. The challenge is when you're just visually analyzing a serve, you don't always know. You can make some assumptions, you can guess a little bit based on what you see happening, but without doing a full physical screen of some sort to know, you're always going to be guessing. So the preference and what I do with every athlete, we'll do a full physical screening. Usually, preferably before we see them serve. The reason we do that is because then we can figure out very quickly if the physical screen shows up certain limitations, and then we see those limitations in the service motion, then we know it's related. If the physical screen shows up and they're physically fine, there's not huge limitations in certain areas, and yet they're still having trouble getting into certain positions that they should be able to get into, then we know it's a technical adjustment and we just focus on the technique. But if you focus on the technique only, on the adjustment, without knowing that it could be a physical cause, that's why a lot of players and coaches get frustrated with this, because they're like, we've been working on this for 6 months and we haven't improved. That's usually a sign that it's probably not a technical issue. It's probably a physical limitation and the athlete can't get in that position. So to simply answer your question, you need to look at it through both lenses, but you need to have the information on the physical side to know whether it potentially is physical or technical.
Good. Chris?
We have a good question from Scott Fraser, who's asked, what are the fundamental footwork patterns or moves that you would prioritize with developing players?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little link in the chat box. The International Tennis Performance Association put together basically 30 or so of the most common tennis movements. And the purpose behind that was we were in a coaching group similar to this. A lot of high-level coaches, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and from all over the world. Had probably 20 countries in this group. And we were talking footwork, and everyone's looking at the same footwork video of a player, and they're using like 20 different terms to describe it. Flow step, pivot step, jump step, double hop step, rotational step, ballerina step. It was crazy, the amount of names. And then they were trying to translate from different languages as well. So you had the Argentinian guy trying to translate the Spanish terminology into English, and he's sort of messing that up a little bit. And so we had so many different names for the same thing, and that was the light bulb moment for me. I'm like, everyone in this room are some of the best coaches on the planet. They all know what they're doing, yet they don't use a consistent language. So if you go to itpatennis.com, and I'll put it in the chat box, it's free. You just download it. It'll say, hey, just, and it's called the Tennis Footwork and Movement Guide, and it really just goes through these. So that'll be the easiest resource for people to use. But the most important ones we know, front crossover from the recovery step. You want to do that, and you want to train that more than shuffling. Nothing wrong with shuffling if you got plenty of time, but it's just slower. So you don't really want to train slow. Whenever you're training, you want to train fast. You want to make sure that you've got your X and V patterns down really well. And I know you guys do a lot of that type of training over there, so you understand the drills we're talking about, but you got to have the right footwork patterns when you do the drill. The drill in itself doesn't make you better. It's doing the drill the right way that makes you better. So that's really important. And then the specifics of being in the air a little longer than on the ground, trying to work on taking bigger steps rather than smaller steps. But to take bigger steps, you need to have more strength. You need to have more stability to do that. So the reason a lot of people take smaller steps sometimes is because they're just not strong or stable enough to push into the ground effectively and to feel comfortable like that. So that would be sort of some immediate take-homes. But if you go to the website and the link, you can download the stuff there and really look through it in detail.
Sorry, Chris, just one thing to add on this. I think that one thing, Mark, disagree with me if I'm wrong, that back in the day you had more shuffle because the tennis was slower, so it's no problem.
Correct.
So I think that now it's very important for us as a coach to teach the players how to walk and run to the ball instead of jump.
Yep.
Because when you move the ball jumping, the time that you are in the air, maybe the ball's coming to you. So we have to, again, this is something that we know how much we fought there in USDA to try to make the players walking more to the ball instead of jumping or shuffle, because the speed of the tennis.
Yeah, for sure. It's so true. I mean, the other big reason why people shuffled so much in the early days, like you said, it's the game was slower. They didn't have to, but a lot of people learnt on grass courts as well. And grass is a little bit harder because it's a little wet sometimes. You don't feel like you have your footing, so you take smaller steps so you don't lose your footing as much. Now, very few places play on grass anymore, so that's the other reason. So you're 100% right. It's such an important piece that needs to be taught young because it makes a huge difference.
Good that you didn't disagree. You didn't disagree with me.
No, 100%. I never disagree.
No. We have a question from Colin Fleming, the legend.
Caught me by surprise there. I've got some kids going nuclear in the background, so hopefully you won't hear them. Mark, I'm very interested. I thought it'd be interesting for people to hear as well. Obviously, we're talking a lot about biomechanics, technical things. In your experience, your opinion, how long or what's the process for getting these things ingrained, making them permanent? Because obviously, it's one thing making a change with a player in any given session, but how do we go about, making that ingrained, like I say, and making it a permanent skill that they master?
Yeah, it's a great question and it's an important one because there's a couple challenges to that. One is a change, typically technical change, majority of the time is what we're talking about here, should feel good pretty much immediately. I mean, if it doesn't feel good in the first day, in the first 30, 40 balls you hit, it's probably not the right change. It doesn't mean you're going to be accurate with it and you're going to be able to execute it perfectly or anything like that because change is difficult. But when you do it right, it should feel like, wow, that felt better. That was more efficient. My timing was better. My contact position was better. The outcome was better. All these things should make you feel good about that change. So that's the first step. I always look to see if it's one of those scenarios where it doesn't feel good to the player, but the coach is like, hey, I still think it's the right change. It probably isn't the right change. So just because the coach thinks it is, if the player's not getting any positive outcome or response from it, ask yourself that question. Am I just being stubborn and I think it's a good idea? But if the player's not feeling it at all, it's probably not the right direction to go. So you want to get that first semblance of positive feedback, and yes, it's making a positive adjustment. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect every time. You're going to spray balls, you're going to have issues. But over the course of a week, you should see improvement. And for most technical changes, shouldn't take more than a few weeks to feel good about. But the challenge then it's just practice. For a lot of the challenge is with how long can it stick and can you get better and better with it. So the data's a bit all over the place with that question because everyone wants that answer because it all has to do with how good someone learns and how dedicated they are to the task. We've all dealt with those athletes that you show them one time or you say, hey, do what Federer does. And then in 5 minutes, they're doing it perfectly, and you actually didn't need to be on the court. You could have just sent them a 10-second clip of Federer and say, copy that, and your job's done. And it makes you look like a great coach when it really had nothing to do with you. It was just the players really skilled at visual copying. Then you got other players that you'll spend weeks on that same exact thing, and by week 4, you're starting to get to the point where they feel comfortable with it. It's working and things like that. So I wish I could give you, hey, it's exactly 21 days for every person. We don't have that luxury, but usually if it takes more than a month for them to feel competent in it, something's wrong. There's definitely an issue there, whether it's a coaching issue, you're not cueing them right, whether based on their physical limitations they can't do it, and even though you're trying to get them to do something, there may be another reason they can't do it, or subconsciously they're sabotaging it because they don't agree with it, and that happens as well psychologically. Players are stubborn. Some of the best players we know are the most stubborn, and even though it probably is the right change for them, it's not the right change for them if they don't think it is. So we have to get them to that point. I mean, you've got great examples of great players that should have changed certain things in their career and have probably been told that multiple times and never changed, because in their mind it wasn't the right change, even though everyone on the planet would agree that they probably should have changed that.
I think one example is Rafa's forehand, the end of the forehand. Yep. He said that since he's very young, the Tony and everybody should be different, but I have a good example about this, Mark. Like Mark, for the one who doesn't know, was very important on John Isner's serve, Madison Keys, Sloan, and now Opelka, who for me will be the biggest server of the history, I think. With Madison was very interesting. Uh, I was having Madison for a week on clay before go tournament, and she was there in Palm Springs with me and Jose. And I don't remember that she used to serve like bringing the feet together, but her warm up was platform. So Jose was there watching. She was warming up platform, and he said, "That's pretty good. That's your warm up." And then she said, "Yeah, that's my warm up." Okay, give me the normal serve. And then she said normal serve. And then Jose said, "Give me 10 serves platform, but without warm up." She served 10 serves platform without warm up, and Jose said, "You know what? That's your new serve." And then like you said, the same moment she saw that, well, first of all, less coordination I need is simple, and the outcome is probably better. So took to her like not even a talk for Jose or me to explain was that that's great, and then boom, she never more changed to the other way.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and that the same story happened with Andy Roddick, how he changed his serve. Same deal. He had a terrible serve. I played doubles with him at the Junior US Open, and he before he had his serve, and then they were practicing one day, him and his coach Stanford, and literally in 10 serves they changed his serve, and he never really thought about his serve ever again. And it's what happens once you get efficient movement patterns. It's because they're great athletes, they're disciplined, they're able to do it. Some players it takes longer, unfortunately.
And so like Madison, you know that Jose always said at USTA we had this talk a lot with the coach. Sometimes less is more. So sometimes the overcoaching. If you go there and take Madison and explain why, maybe you should not make the change.
Yep.
The coaching that he said was that Madison, I think that's it. Now what do you think? No, I feel good. All right, done. Chris.
Yep. Graham K has got an excellent question, Mark, which is, which people have you learned the most from, and what are the things that you do still today from those people?
Yeah, it is a great question, actually. When I do my serve slide presentations, I do a handful of different ones to coaches normally and sometimes to players. I have a slide that says standing on the shoulders of giants, and I list out all these people. The list keeps getting longer. I have over 50 people on it, and I know I'm missing people. But in general, there's a combination of medical, sports science, biomechanics folks. They're the researchers. They're the people that I pick the brains of from true lab scientists. They're geeks. I mean, and they love being called geeks. They just are in the numbers in the lab. Many of them have never hit a tennis ball in their life. You know, they just look at numbers all day, and they look at angles and joints and stuff like that. So you've got people like Bruce Elliott, who's one of the best tennis researchers from Australia. You've got Todd Ellenbecker, who heads up the ATP Medical Services. He's probably the best physical therapist and upper extremity shoulder person I've ever met. Paul wrote it, who I worked for at the USTA. Most people don't realize he was a really great biomechanist when he started, and then he got into sports administration and things like that. You've got a lot. I could name a ton, but that's on the medical side. And then on the coaching side, Jose is the coach I spent probably the most time with. It was interesting. I started about 6 months before Jose started. So I was really new to the USTA and everything. And then Patrick McEnroe and Jose came in. And Jose, as Leo knows, never really used a computer, never really did anything, wrote anything down. So we were trying to sort of get his knowledge and put it together and teach it to other people around the country. And I was responsible for doing that. And so I spent months with him, and he would just coach and teach and be on court, and I'd be writing notes down and then trying to put it into PowerPoints and explain it and try to simplify and actually expand sometimes some of the stuff that he does. So that was the way I learned a lot, and that was about a year of doing that. So there's a lot coming from that. And then you've just been around so many great coaches. I grew up in Australia, so I spent a lot of time with Pat Cash, which he was one smart guy. The way he looks at tennis, and analyzes it. More recently, I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time with Andre Agassi, another guy that looks at tennis in a different way than most people. He's 3 or 4 shots ahead always, and just about how you approach the game. So you just get these groupings of different people from different backgrounds that would never speak to each other in normal life. These medical folks, some former players, some coaches, and then I've been fortunate to work in other sports. And you get some really interesting perspectives when you start learning from other sports because they are looking at it through a different lens, and done a lot in baseball, which has some similarities to some of the tennis movements, the rotational training for hitting, the pitching and serving, things like that. So it's a great question. We could spend a whole week and I probably wouldn't be able to answer it well, but those were just a few people.
Great. Thanks, Mark. We have a question from Matthew Rankin, who is a Scottish player in our GB National Tennis Academy. Let's go, Matthew.
Hi. What do you find are the similarities or differences between athletes in different sports like tennis and other sports like basketball?
Yeah, I mean, it's more the mental side, which is the similarity. It's a great question. If you look at the greats, and, I've been fortunate to be around a lot in different sports, and you're talking about the Hall of Famers in their sports. When you're talking about the greats, you're talking about the absolute best of the best. And they're all very similar. I mean, it's amazing how similar their mindset is. They're looking at every way to get better every single day. I mean, it's crazy. There was a former great. I won't name the person because it's kind of interesting how in depth they go. But they were a former great tennis player, Hall of Famer, and they had a kid who was a really good baseball athlete, and they were talking about improving their mechanics, and if you could make their shoe an inch higher, would they be able to throw the baseball harder or better by increasing their height a little bit? So it's just a mindset. They're always looking to figure out, how can I get this player better? How can I improve? And I think that's the biggest similarity, whether it's basketball, whether it's baseball, whether it's soccer. Those folks are looking to always find ways to beat their competition and make themselves better. It's a combination of things. You want to always make yourself better, but you're always trying to beat someone else normally as well. So that's why if you watch Federer, when he usually tries to practice in his preseason, most of the time he's asking for a left-hander because he wanted to find ways to beat Nadal. So he had to figure out strategies to do that. Now with Djokovic being as good as he is, the challenge now is you have to beat a left-hander and then someone that never misses and is a brick wall and moves better than anyone on the planet. So it's a tough combination then. But they were trying to find solutions there. So that would be the biggest commonality. Probably the biggest differences is what they need to work on. Tennis is a tough sport because you have to be fast, you have to be agile, but you also have to have great endurance, and you have to do it year round. So you just can't, like, say in basketball, they train very differently to tennis. There's not a lot of endurance training in basketball. In basketball, it's all about short, quick movements, getting explosive as much as you can, and then they spend a lot of time on recovery because they only play, many of these players, 25 or 30 minutes a game, but it beats them up. I mean, these guys are beat up pretty good after 30 minutes of the activity they do. So they need to, they're like a Ferrari. They have to, work at a really, really high level, but they're in the shop all the time. Whereas, a tennis player, I would say, is more like a Mercedes or a BMW. It's really nice, it's really good at everything, but it's not in the shop very often. It has to play year round. So you have to sort of understand sort of the different aspects of athletes.
Good. Let me make one question, Chris, before you go with your question. Mark, I think that this is more for the players listening here, and I think that we coaches have a little bit better idea of this, but for players it's great. I think that when you are young, they always pay attention at the moment. So practice start at 2, they start to focus at 2. Practice finish at 4, they finish at 4. And we see that more and more how important is the pre-practice, the after-practice, the pre-match, the after-match. How important is take care of the body. Injury prevention, stretching, everything. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because I think it's something that become more and more important because when you get injured, you don't play.
Yeah.
Uh,
And the older you get, the players realize that and they commit to it. It's pretty much across the board in all sports. The older the players get, the more they respect their body and understand that if they get injured, they don't get paid, like you said. So they spend significantly more time outside the court than inside the court on working on their craft. So whereas at the younger ages, understandably, you're not usually injured too much. You love playing tennis. Everything's focused on hitting a tennis ball and being inside the lines. But the sooner you realize that the outside the lines part of what you do will allow you to be inside the lines longer and better is vital. And the earlier you can realize it and commit to it, the better career you're going to have. Not only from a health standpoint, but also performance-wise. You're going to be able to hit the ball harder. You're going to be able to hit more spin. You're going to be able to move better, which allows you to win more. So there's both aspects need to be done. So, my world is predominantly actually outside the lines. Most of what I spend my time on is how do we get you better on, like you said, training, nutrition, recovery, sleep, all those areas that play a huge role in how well you do when you play your matches.
Great, thanks.
We have a question from a Canadian coach, Neil Parker, who has had to go and run away and do some emergency homeschooling, so I'll ask it in his behalf. He asked about your opinion on the definition or importance of the two words rhythm and momentum. I kind of have some experience with this because we use those terms in our coach education structure as well, so he's interested in what your take is on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not sure. I actually I was asked to do a review of that term, rhythm specifically, pretty recently, and it was interesting because I've never used the term rhythm when I coach. It's not a term I use a lot, partly because it's hard to define. It's very difficult to define. People have tried. If you look in the dictionary, the term rhythm, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a consistent beat is how they define it. The way I'd look at it is, are you efficient or not efficient in your movement? And when I use the term efficient, it always means how are you summating your forces from a physics standpoint. That's just the way I've learned in my training. If you've learned it in a different way, you'd probably answer that question very differently. But in general, if you summate your forces and your kinetic chain transfer is efficient, you're going to have good rhythm. If you're not, and there's a break in the chain somewhere along the way, your rhythm's going to be off. Timing, some people use the term timing as well. So that's the way I'd answer that rhythm aspect is, we all say, hey, we need better rhythm. That's a comment we hear all the time, or that player's rhythm is off. That doesn't help us. We all kind of see that. The player's not doing what they need to do, but do we have a good fix for it? And do we understand where the chink in the armor is, and can we address it directly? So that would probably be the rhythm piece of it. Momentum, and again, are we talking about momentum in strategy, in like gameplay and points and winning and losing, or are we talking about momentum in the physics capacity?
Physics, I think.
Yeah.
Knowing the Canadian system, and obviously we are heavily influenced by Louis Caille as well, we have a very definite way of thinking of momentum in terms of changing body speed, but it's something I've wrestled with as well because the literal definition is up in the air. So
yeah, and that's the hard part. Being a science-trained person, you always like, what is the definition? What is the formal terminology that you're describing? And in coaching, we use all sorts of crazy terms that have been changed from the original definition, and people use it. So I'm not saying any of that would be wrong or incorrect. It's just, are we using it literally, or have we got our own sort of definition of it based on how we've adapted it? So I think that's where the challenge is in it. But the question is, do we all kind of see it as the same way when we see it in a player? So if you've got a player who's got great rhythm, I think we would all agree, we would be able to point that out. That player's got great rhythm, that player doesn't. The way I look at it is, where's the break in the chain that is causing the rhythm to be off, and then let's fix it that way. So it gives me a very simple it's a scientific method. Ask a question, what's the problem, find the solution, and then put the fix in to go. So it makes my life really easy. I may be very simple in the way I look at it, but it's just, hey, figure out where the problem is. Usually you can go back to some break in the kinetic chain, fix that, and then get that positioning right so that you can make the adjustment, and it should fix the problem at that point. And again, I don't want to simplify it that much, that I know there's other factors that sometimes can go into it. But in general, that's the way I usually start with addressing a rhythm issue, or if there's something out of sync. And then if all those things still haven't fixed it, then it could be something else. And there could be a huge limitation physically. There could be a mental block that we're not addressing that's causing it. There could be other factors, but at least I know where to start.
I think, Mark, you said something very important, is that to be simple with the definition. I think a lot of times as a coach, you need to understand that we deal a lot of times with kids, so what is easy for us to understand, maybe the definition is not easy for them.
Correct.
So sometimes the word is very easy for us, but it's not easy for them. So probably the simple is the best way.
Yeah.
And sometimes put ourselves as a listener, not just as a speaker, because when you speak, you don't know the effect of your words in the listener. And then when you're 14 years old and they say, I don't know, it's a very tough word for them, but it's easy for us. So I think that's a very good point. I will have a question straight from Barcelona, which is we try to add a lot of clay in our program as well. You know that I worked in Spain a lot of years, and also Spanish is something that you did in USTA, and we try to use David from BTT as well to help Sean with something of. I think everybody agrees that the Spanish is probably the best movers in the world. So David Rodriguez, is a pleasure. Go for my friend.
Hello everybody. First of all, nice to meet you, Mark. My question is about the footwork. I am interested because most of the players who come to Barcelona PTT, I think anywhere in Spain, they are like expecting like to learn about the footwork, like how to like slide on the court, how to move properly, and I think sometimes it's a misconception, like start like sliding all around the court, because the sheer load you are applying to the court with a low friction, and because of the like you said before, like every action has a reaction. Most of that sheer like load that you are applying to the surface is like losing on the ground. It's not like coming back. And what I'm always like try to teach is like that sliding on the court is like only to adjust a few last centimeters in the last step before a shot, or like in a really like hard ball, in a really like hard like drop shot that you use like a resource in that situation. Because I think if you are able to find like the right balance on a clay court, is really easy after to apply to the hard court, but it is not the same in the opposite way, because as I said, like in the third law, the Newton law, that gives you back all the action, that all the force you apply to the ground, it gives you back the hard court because of the friction. How do you try to teach that when you are always like working more in a hard court environment?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's important, like you said. Sliding is a result, not a cause, really. You know, you don't want to over-teach sliding, like you said. There's a lot of players, even on hard courts now, that over-slide and slide for shots they shouldn't be sliding to, and it's actually making them worse, not better. So from a hard court standpoint, we looked at this as the Sports Science Committee a long time ago. Probably James Blake was the first big American to slide a lot on hard court. And so people were interested at that time. Is this something we should be teaching our juniors? You know, irrespective of sliding on clay, it was sliding on hard court was the question that came up. And, you know, everyone originally was thinking it's dangerous, it's going to hurt them, it's bad for them, things like that. And so we actually did a study on it, looking at sliding and frictional forces and pressure per square inch in their feet on a slide compared to a traditional hard stop and go with no sliding. And as you would expect, the pressure per square inch was much higher when you don't slide than when you do, because you've got much more distance to slide over and your pressure going through the body is a lot less. So the study actually showed that it was less chance of injury when you slide than if you don't slide. So that was opposite to what most people were thinking going into it. So that was the sliding question from that perspective. But from a standpoint of how do you teach it, I don't spend a lot of time overly teaching sliding. I mean, like you said, all your players that grew up on it, they didn't learn how to slide necessarily. They weren't taught, step-by-step way of sliding. But when you get a 14, 15, 16-year-old who's grown up on hard court and has never really played on clay, you do have to teach them how to slide because they don't know how to do it. So typically it's just a hip turn. I usually use the foot as the guide, but it's a hip turn. Hip in the direction of where you're going, and then you're trying to get a low center of mass out as wide as you can. And if you're just going to break it down as simply as that, that's the starting point. But like you said, you don't want to slide into things unless it's a adjusting step or a last minute move or a very wide ball. So I agree with you 100%. You don't want to overteach the slide, and you don't want to overuse it either. It makes you slower in most scenarios than actually getting there, loading hard, pushing hard into the ground, recovering quick.
I think, Mark, this is a very, very good discussion. David, thanks a lot for the question. Like, we had this a lot with the Americans who never play on clay. So I think the best definition that I heard about sliding was from Jose explaining the Americans a little bit. He said, we slide when we need, not when you want. So the slide is a tool that you use when you need. Like, okay, do you have to know how to slide to play well on clay? Absolutely. You cannot just Agassi win a Grand Slam without slide. So you have to learn, but I think that put them in situations that allow them to slide is a way better way to coach them than, okay, let's be coaching how to slide. I don't know if you agree or not that the situation will teach more than the formal coaching.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's the biggest aspect of good coaching is situational coaching versus overly technical coaching. And even though I've studied technical coaching probably more than most, when I'm out with an athlete, most of what we do is situational coaching. Put them in the situations and make them make the adjustment rather than us breaking it down into pieces and trying to overly coach an environment. And again, we've worked with higher level athletes most of the time, pretty competent, pretty motivated, so it's easier sometimes, but most people respond to success well. So if you put them in environments where they feel it and they can do it, and then you give them positive feedback that that's the correct way, they're going to get more enjoyment out of that type of coaching than an overly precise technical model of 20 different steps to get them into a certain position.
I think that sometimes this is our culture as well, that from parents, from players, that as more you talk, better coach you are. So they give me a lot of information for my son. That's great. And to be honest, I think it's a disfavor.
A big time. Because also we know that individuals can only learn and process about 2 or 3 thoughts at a time. So if you're giving them more than that, then they're not able to process those in actions anyway. So it's wasteful and it's potentially counterproductive because it's confusing and then they're really unsure of what they should be doing.
Right, great. I have a question. Ashley Webster, please.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So it's just in relation, Mark, for instance, on the serve and the dominant shoulder, how much the dominant shoulder affects the serve. So, for instance, if you're a right-handed player and you have your dominant shoulder as your right shoulder in comparison to your left shoulder.
What do you mean by exactly? How does it relate? Can you give me a little more info on that question?
Yeah, in terms of like the rotational kind of forces and the energy that you when you're serving, like it going up and out in terms of. So, for instance, if you're a righty and you've got a left shoulder dominance, you can generally accelerate faster from the forehand side than the backhand. Obviously, you can train it up and strengthen it up as you're more aware in terms of how you can create the energy, how much it affects the energy or the velocity on the serve.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding if I'm answering this right, but in general, we know that internal rotation of the shoulder is really important from a stability perspective. It helps slow down the arm after contact. External rotation range of motion at the shoulder is really what gives us our range, and that's the value in improving velocity, especially at kind of the cocking stage 4 of the serve. So that's really important in the dominant shoulder. So is that sort of what you were getting at?
Partly. I mean, it was in case like if your right shoulder fires faster than the left. And let's say if you're a right-hander, and obviously your left shoulder will rotate round to come up and over for the serve.
Mm-hmm.
If your right shoulder's the faster firer than the left, compared to the right, what would be the kind of a difference from that perspective?
Yeah, so the right side of the body, and it's really the right hip that's doing a lot of the work early on, not so much the shoulder. The shoulder then kicks in once you store energy in this position. So once you get into your cocking position, from there up, shoulder's definitely important. But getting to there is pretty much mainly lower body transfer. So we got to have the range to get there. But then once you come out through there, then it's all right shoulder. Left shoulder doesn't play a huge role except for stabilizing the body, because the left shoulder is coming down. You're coming down trying to stay side on, so you're trying to then get the right shoulder over the left. So that shoulder over shoulder position becomes really, really important.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Great.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask my question. So about 2-3 years ago, Mark, I heard Novak Djokovic give an answer in one of these kind of ATP quick-fire questions. The question was, what one thing could you not live without? Most of the other players were saying their phone. He said stretching. So my question is, what physical habit would you say that most players should have as a daily routine? And if there was one for coaches, if you could give one for coaches, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It varies. I mean, I wish I could say everyone should be the same. I've met some great athletes that haven't stretched that much, and I've met others that have stretched, like you said, like Novak's known as the overstretcher. He stretches more than anyone on the tour. But for him and how he plays and how his body's designed, that's his priority. Other people, it's lifting heavy weight. There's certain guys on tour that they need to be in the gym every day lifting heavy, and that's sort of their safety blanket. That's how that makes them strong, makes them feel good. So that's why the personalization of it is so important at the higher levels. At the younger levels, you better be good at all of those. You better stretch, you better lift weights, you better eat right, you better sleep right, you better listen to your coaches and stay disciplined and focused. So I don't think I feel comfortable giving one only, but it's that combination approach at the young ages to be pretty good at everything. And then as you get a bit older, it becomes highly personalized based on your game style, based on where you're trying to get to, as to where you focus your energies even more. Because you have to be good at everything these days. There isn't one tennis player who's successful that is really bad at anything right now.
Mark, I know you have to leave in 2 or 3 minutes. If I can make the last question, you can answer this very fast. I'm reading during the lockdown. I'm reading a lot about return. I'm studying a lot about return. I don't know if you saw. If you didn't, I sent to you a very nice interview from Radio Pelka yesterday or today, the Racket magazine. That he talks about like how he's becoming a very good returner for his size, and he thinks something that if he's able to 15% of the game is being there fighting for the break. He knows that 90% of the time people will not have any chance to break, so this will make go to another level. And one of the things that I'm doing my research on returning, watching a lot of videos, for me, Djokovic and Murray and Ferrero for the three main guys that I watch. And I know you wrote a piece for New York Times about Djokovic. Can you tell us, like, very quick, the 2 or 3 main things that you look at the return?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I've been working with Riley and his coach Jay for the last year or so with some stuff on the return, and I won't share exactly what he's working on, but it's significant and it's made a big difference. And I mean, but in general, he's got some different issues than most because of how tall he is and his wingspan and different things related to that. But for generals people, Djokovic, like you said, is a great model, but he's got a really wide base. His flexibility allows him to have that really wide base. Most players can't get into that position because they don't have that range. So be careful. And I've seen players, we've known a few players that have tried to go really wide base when they're returning to copy Djokovic and are terrible at it because they can't get out of there. They're not strong enough and they're not flexible enough to get out of there. So you just have to be careful about copying the greats if you don't look like them physically. But in general, simplification, shorter backswings, using your hips to direct the motion rather than the racket. So turn your hips rather than turn your shoulders or turn your racket. And then, that's really the objective, is simplification on the returns. And the best ones of all time, Jimmy Connors, Andre Agassi, it doesn't matter what era, they have the same basic mechanics. I mean, they have different starting positions, but once they at the top of their split, they all look the same.